tafsir must be more scholarly and or it needs a special person to do it? Reflection on thoughts that you have.
So remember that tafsir is the enterprise of a specialist. The prerequisites for tafsir are extensive. Many of the greatest scholars wrote their tafsir toward the end of their lives because it demands such a huge number of prerequisites. And many of the scholars whose works we consider tafsir did not themselves consider themselves worthy of tafsir. A good example is a contemporary 20th century scholar, Sheikh Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi rahimahullah, who has a very popular explanation of the Quran that was at once very relatable, but also brought a lot of beautiful new reflections. And he was one of the first scholars to really, where the teaching of Islam really permeated the video airwaves. It was extensively distributed throughout the Middle East, and then now you can find it online. He passed away about 2 decades ago. But he himself did not consider this great work tafsir, right? And we're talking volumes and volumes and volumes. He considered it khawatir, and he did it towards the end of his life. And so this is after, keep in mind, just as an example, not to be attached to any one personality, I'm just choosing a contemporary example. This is a person who went specifically to Azhar type schools, not at the university level, but from a young age, right? And so you're on this path. Also, for those of you that were blessed to interact with Sheikh Bayanouni, may Allah Azza wa Jal grant him health, he and his family are also on this path, that they train for Islamic scholarship from the primary schools, right? And then, for example, depending on the system, for example, his was in Syria, during the middle school years, they'll choose to primarily focus on Shafi'i or Hanafi or other schools of thought. And so it's an extensive amount of training. And you're talking about these people waited until their 50s and 60s, many of them, to write their tafsir works, okay? And so it was always seen as this enterprise requiring lots of specialization. It's not an inside club. Any one of us is as eligible, inshallah, to seek to contribute to tafsir as we are to become a surgeon, right? But you're talking about decades of investment and research to get the necessary prerequisites. Whereas at-tadabbur is more the enterprise of each of us to interact with the Quran, to read, to reflect. What else did we do last week?
We reflected on specific verses from the Quran.
Okay.
Verses 1 through 51 of chapter 26.
Very good. So we looked at Surah Ash-Shu'ara, chapter 26. And what was the style of reflection or quote-unquote tafsir that we were looking at? I mentioned it in passing. I don't know if anybody noticed. This is the style of tafsir mawdu'i, like thematic tafsir. In other words, we were not going ayah by ayah, word by word, the definition of this word and so on, which is called tafsir tahlili, or analytical tafsir. Okay? So if we were, for example, what we did really last week was pure reflection, right? You didn't have a lot of prerequisites and so on, but even as we were bringing resources to our discussion, this is more a style of thematic tafsir, looking at broad themes in the surah. Nobody ever says they have the final say on the surah, or the surah's main theme is this. How would we know that? But we know that some of the main themes, for example, we talked about da'wah, we talked about the issue of signs and people that would not accept. We talked about a lot of these issues. These are some broad themes around which the ayat are revolving. This style is a more contemporary style and has become more popular in recent times, especially as people have lost the prowess with the Arabic language, right? And so in order for a person to understand every word of the Quran before they get a gist can be exhausting for many of us in contemporary times. And so this is another style of tafsir that's very helpful to get some general sense of what's being read, understanding that if you're confused about a word or you're confused about a specific ruling, you should go back and ask, okay? Analytical tafsir is more slow, it's more precise, it's more, step by step. How did you feel when we did the reflection last week?
Somewhat confused.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Not being sure about exactly what the interpretation was or should be.
Okay. And I think that's an experience that was shared by many people. As you're going, you get an ayah that you're confused about something, and there might be more than one opinion. The difference is, now you become conscious of that, right? And it becomes a question. And most of these questions are not, it's not like your relationship with Allah is going to be put on hold, right? I mean, even if you get an earth-shattering question, from our maturity is to understand, I believe in Islam, I have a question. I shouldn't stop praying. I shouldn't. This is a weakness in our approach. If any single question brings our Islam crashing down, this means that we're not taking a comprehensive enough approach with our religion. But most questions aren't even at that level. It's like, oh, I wonder if it's this or this. I wonder what the ulama said about this. But now you're conscious of those questions, and those questions open the door for deeper understanding. If you're just racing through, or a lot of us, unfortunately, read the Quran exclusively for barakah, right? We read when somebody dies, or when somebody is born, or it's Ramadan, on these occasions. This type of recitation, it's not bad. I mean, the Quran is full of barakah, it's full of blessing, but it's not going to give you anywhere near the relationship and depth that you would have by giving the book time and attention, right? And it's okay if you have questions. What were other feelings that people experienced? Okay, so better understanding, right? And I wanted to emphasize that to you. You didn't have a pre-crash course in the surah. I didn't give you anything. I said, here's some ayat, consider it, right? And even though many of us don't speak Arabic as a primary language, even though many of us are not specialized in the Islamic sciences per se, there was just a lot by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've made the Quran easy to remember, so as there any be reminded. And so we emphasize the importance of attention and time, which is something that a lot of us, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all and enable us to do better, don't give the Quran. We don't give that consistent attention. Somebody shared something really nice with me after class last time. He told me, I noticed that as much as I benefited from others' reflections, it was not as much as I benefited from my own, right? Meaning what? Meaning that you can't read the Quran by proxy. You can't read the Quran by a third party. You need to give the Quran attention, right? And alhamdulillah, the resources now and things that are out there have made this easier than so many times in history, in that there's online resources, there's flex scheduling, there's local stuff, there's distance stuff. So many resources if you're willing to give the attention, okay? But then he shared, but there was also an experience in the group that I wouldn't have gotten individually. And these two, they seem contradictory, but they're complementary, right? That each of us, when we give the Quran attention, we get an individual benefit, and yet there are also special blessings for worshiping in jama'ah, right? And many of the acts of worship of Islam, some of them have to be done in groups. You can't do a single Hajj in January because you feel like it, right? It's done together. And then other things, such as the congregational prayer, it has a special blessing in jama'ah, right? And others are individual. But here, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which means that no group of people gather in a house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reflecting and studying on the Quran, except that Allah Azza wa Jal descends upon them as sakina, the feeling of peace and tranquility. And al-Rahmah encompasses them, okay? And they are mentioned in Allah's highest assembly. That Allah Azza wa Jal mentions them with those who are with Him in this distinguished gathering, right? And so these blessings are blessings we believe in because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised them through the hadith of His Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And so this is a blessing that comes through this type of activity, by worshiping together in a group, reading the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو آيَاتِهِ. That He's the one that sent among the unlettered ones a messenger from themselves that would recite to them His signs, His ayat, right? And the Prophet ﷺ used to recite the Quran to the companions, but even from his humility, he would love to hear the recitation of the Quran from the companions as well. There's a number of narrations in this regard. Anyone else reflections on the thematic tafsir? Any questions before we switch gears on anything we talked about last time or the last couple of classes? Okay, you ready? You awake? Are you sure? All right. I want to talk actually about some practical considerations when dealing with religious texts and religious opinions. So, and to be frank with you, I mean, I am bouncing a little bit because this is not a pure aqidah topic per se. It has to do with fiqh, has to do with some of the tools in the tradition. But I think it's very timely, I think it's important, and I think we can do it in parallel as we continue to develop our tools. Remember that in the first half of this class, we go on an academic year, right? And so kind of up until the winter, we're taking some case studies along the way, but really trying to build our tool repertoire, right? And look at how Iman and Islam and Aqidah and so on are dealt with to really empower us to deal with very sensitive points in Islamic history and very confusing issues in the second half when we deal with modernity, when we deal with some of the trials of colonization, of how do Muslim scholars deal with the confluence of these issues. And if we were to do that today, we wouldn't be able to do anything other than read articles, right? We'd be reading other people's opinions. So we're just trying to build a little bit of tools so that we can look at this ourselves. So I want to talk a little bit about practical considerations when dealing with the religious opinion. Then we're going to go back and reinforce some issues on Iman and Kufr, and then we're going to kind of transition topics again in about 2 weeks from now. So when we look at, again, I'm looking broader than issues of Iman to now ayat and texts in general, which have a lot of also legislation and worship matters and so on. There are matters that are purely worship in nature, okay? They are purely devotional in nature. And there are matters that are everyday interactions, transactions, issues, and so on. And then there are things that are kind of in between. They may have elements of both, but I want you to keep in mind these two categories. Matters that are purely devotional or worship in nature, and matters that are not, matters that are issues of everyday interaction and so on. Okay? And we want to talk a little bit about what is the role of reason, what is the role of aql, rationality, thinking, when dealing with texts that deal with each of these. We want to talk about how, when I run into a text, that text could be something about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that could be something in aqidah, it could be something in some religious ruling. How do I know how to deal with my opinion versus the opinion of others versus anything? Okay, so that's where we're going. Somebody give me a matter that is purely devotional in nature.
Prayer.
Okay? As-salah, does anybody disagree? Of course you always disagree. I'm just picking on you. Why do you think it's not?
At least the father sometimes referred to as a communal prayers. So there's an element of interactiveness with others.
Say that again, sorry.
I said the mandatory prayers are sometimes referred to as the communal prayers. And so there is maybe at least there's an encouragement of interaction with others.
Okay. Other thoughts? Devotional or not? Purely worship or not?
Would you agree, when you need something, a special prayer for that, so you're getting something out of it, as far as expressing your need. So, obviously it's not a transaction, but it is definitely not something that you just do because you just wonder.
Okay.
Or the communal aspect, just something that you get up and you do
These are good thoughts. Let me talk more about what do we mean by devotional here. The issue of devotional is that its only purpose is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Meaning that there is no other material perceived benefit. Okay? In other words, by thinking, when I look at this, I know, oh, this brings this material benefit. This gives me this. This brings this to society. Okay? This is a class of ibadah that is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We do it because Allah commanded, and there's no other material perceived benefit. Okay? To be fair, these issues have a spectrum of discussion around them. I want you to understand the concepts, the examples are just illustrating them. But can somebody give me a benefit of prayer that comes in the Quran? We're still talking about as-salah. Somebody tell me a benefit of prayer that is mentioned in the Quran. Inna as-salata tanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That salah prevents a person from, private, like small and large sins, rough translation, like, even wrongdoing. Would you be able to extract that benefit by looking at the form of prayer if Allah hadn't told you that that's what happens? Maybe, maybe not. Okay? So this is why scholars disagree. The majority of scholars say that the issue of salah is a purely devotional act. Okay? In other words, there's not a rational basis why we do it this way. And something that would be a more clear example is the number of rak'at. That's clearly a pure devotional one. So I'm narrowing the microscope so it's clear. Okay? Is there any rational basis that we know of why Salatul Dhuhr is 4 and not 5 rak'at? Or 3 rak'at?
So, I was not going to answer your question, I was going to ask another one.
Go ahead.
I think what I'm struggling with here is maybe breaking down devotion into two more parts, because when I gave you my answer, I was thinking of the required acts of worship, whereas you can have acts of worship that are not required. So, for me it was like, did I do my 17 for that day and whatever else was required? And how do I do them, and when do I do them? And all of that is clearly outlined between the Quran and the Sunnah, and after that there's not much more for discussion.
The issue of requirement or not is not necessarily the dominant contributor here, in that there are matters that are purely devotional, that are fard, but there are others that are optional and that are good to do, right? And similarly, there are some that are haram, that you must avoid them, and others where there may be more discussion. The issue is really to deal with the rational basis. And so let me restrict it more, right? The number of rak'at. Praying 3 rak'at at dhuhr instead of 4, is it better or worse than praying 4?
It's not allowed.
It's not allowed?
Because Allah said so.
It's worse, because it's more than worse. It's not a valid prayer, right? But that makes sense. That's less prayer. Less prayer is bad. Now if we pray 5 rak'at instead of 4, is it better or worse?
Not allowed.
It's the same. So it's rationally better, but in our deen it's worse, right? Because the issue is not, oh, 4 is good, 5 is better. You see what I'm saying? The issue is that this is a matter of devotion. So this is an example of a devotional matter. Allah Azza wa Jal commanded that Salatul Dhuhr is 4, then you pray 4. You don't come yourself and say, well, I think 5 is better, right? And this could not be a more timely discussion, because I want you to notice as we discuss today, I'm not going to mention them by name, but you are probably going to pick up Facebook debates, Google News feed issues, all these modern fiqh issues that are ripped out of this construct, and people make this mistake, okay? The issue here is that in these rational matters, the basis is to do as is commanded without excessive prodding into why. Well, 4 rak'at was during the desert society of the Arabs, because they didn't have 9-to-5 jobs. I think that praying Isha longer in our times is more fitting to a modern secular world. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but this stuff exists. That's why you shouldn't get Islam from the internet, right? I mean, so is this an appropriate application of reason here? It's not, because in issues that are purely devotional, the concept is that we worship as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded, without excessive prodding into the whys and benefits and objectives. Okay? Why do you think this is important? Okay? Why do you think this is important?
Because that's what establishes whether we have submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay? So al-Islam, submission of one's will, this is a big issue, right? To submit against my whims, my desires, my estimations to the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Great point. What else? People, I'm sorry, one more time.
Go astray.
Yeah.
So if everybody starts to make up their own rules and stuff, then it might change and we might detour from it.
So this is a really essential point, that without some structure for what's discussable and what isn't, what's changeable with time and context and what isn't, at the end you have no religion left. Because it means something different to every person. Everything's negotiable. Okay? I had, and I'm giving you real examples, not to judge people. I'm just giving examples to show life. There was a nice brother one time, somewhere else, that came up and he asked. He said, "I just started a new job, and it's really hard. Can I combine all my prayers at the end of the day? Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha?" And, you know, dealing with a question like this, it's important to ask further questions and check. There are, salah is very important, but there are these isolated circumstances where, for example, if a person's in a very long surgery, a person's a surgeon and goes into these large surgeries where they can't leave, they do have a license to combine prayers or delay them due to the urgent necessity, okay? But after talking to this brother, it was just the struggles of the day. Right? I mean, it was a job where he could step away and so on. And so I tried to very gently remind him, look, you have, at this time, Salat al-Dhuhr was in a window of like 5 hours, 5 hours or so. I said, you have those 5 hours, you're working hard to get an honest living for your family. Find the 5 minutes to step aside and pray so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses the other hundreds of minutes, right? Because he's in a capacity that could do that. When it becomes okay to fatwa shop or for the imam to just say, oh yeah, prayer is the connection with God and it's everybody talks to God in their own love, then that structure of religion erodes. And I want you to understand, this isn't an academic discussion to just make life difficult and so on. The idea is to understand what is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is from His Messenger, what is fixed with time and space except in necessity, right? And what is able to change in context. And that could be the whole class. I'm just trying to give a taste today. So the basis in matters that are purely devotional is submission without excessive into the whys. These purely devotional matters are like what else? Somebody give me another example. Okay? Fasting. Does anyone have a different perspective about fasting? Do you all think that it's purely devotional?
Fasting is different than salah at work. You can fast at work. Salah at work, like for women especially, they have to go and do wudu, change and put cover, and for ladies who doesn't have cover at work. I want explanation for that, please.
Okay, let me give you a brief thing and then we can talk offline for any specific ones. But for a salah, for those of you that are at school or at work, you should be aware of your constitutional rights, and there's a lot of support for men and women with especially the unique needs of our sisters to have that accommodation within reasonable circumstance so that they're able to establish this very important pillar of Islam. And salah doesn't need to be 15 minutes. Like Salat al-Dhuhr can be performed properly with its requirements in 3 to 5 minutes. And in terms of if you have an employer or a situation that's not aware. Often it's lack of awareness. And so often a discussion, they will set aside a conference room or a room, or depending on the office situation, or even outside. And in order to facilitate it more, there are many things that facilitate it in our times. For men and women, there's these slip-on prayer garments, like whether people are home or going to work, so it's not hard to change out of everything and so on, you just slip it on over. And these types of concessions. So I think that's better handled one-on-one, but the basis for people is that a salah should be seen as, it's a pillar of our religion, it's very important. From our desire to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't want to relax it, except for, extreme necessity. And what that is, it can be handled on a one-on-one basis, and there are different opinions that one can deal with depending on a person's work situation. But I've seen a lot of our students are working to have, mashallah, prayer spaces on campuses. Sometimes they have even interfaith prayer spaces that just give a person quiet and that privacy. In our workplaces, CAIR, C-A-I-R, has a little, guide so that you're empowered. And we take consultations all the time at this center to help a person with their individual circumstance. That's like a brief one, and I'm happy to take it more offline, inshallah. Yeah. Okay. That's what I get every Ramadan. I get that we fast to lose weight and forward it to 10 people, or else, all the khair will be taken from your life, right? So again, many scholars would consider fasting a purely devotional matter, because these benefits are not the primary reason to fast, and are not immediately, in other words, tomorrow, if a study comes out that fasting is not, or fasting is good with water only. Like if you fast from food, but leaving water is not good, we're still going to fast the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded. And so these are all good discussions. It doesn't really matter where you categorize it. It's a spectrum, it's not a bucket. But the idea is that this leans towards a more devotional side, right? That it's done essentially for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because in terms of fasts, in terms of people meditate, and that brings some of the material benefits that we expect comes from as-salah. And yet meditation is not as-salah. Fasting is like hip these days. Everybody's fasting, right? And you got the 5 plan, and you got this plan and the other plan. My old boss at work used to say that he loves the fast except for the water. I can't do no water. But other than that, it's really good, you know what I mean? And so that was his fasting. But this takes away the worship and devotional aspect of it. What's one of the pillars of Islam that clearly, from a rational basis, is not a pure devotional matter? Zakah. Why zakah? Okay, there's a clear social benefit, rationally, right? You're taking money from those that have a particular minimum of wealth, and it's helping people get on their feet that are in different circumstances, where either they are stuck in poverty, or they're in transit, such as Ibn Sabil, who may have poverty at home, but he's stuck, or she is stuck, traveling without access to that money as a traveler. And so that zakah helps get them out of that situation into a situation of greater social stability. You see how that's different. There's clear, rational basis for a social benefit. Doesn't mean it's not devotional as well, but I'm trying to illustrate this spectrum. This is not a fiqh class, but this really motivates how our ulama deal with some of these issues. And that, for example, in as-salah, these concessions for, combining prayers is a concession that has several things, but combining prayers outside those windows, right? Like all 4 prayers at the end of the day, is something that does not have a precedent in our sharia. And so therefore, ulama only apply it when there's extreme need, right? Like that surgery, like something that where there's a danger to life, as a broad conception. Whereas the zakat, it's different, it's a broader consideration. Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, looked at some of the zakatul fitr in terms of dates, and reasoned that, that this would not be as beneficial in societies where where dates were not available, or where people's needs were not dates. And so from there came a particular opinion. And again, there's difference around that opinion, but you'll see more scholarly reasoning around these issues that are less purely devotional. Okay?
So zakat is not devotional?
Zakah is both. I'm trying to say it's a spectrum. I'm sorry, I forgot my thing. It's a spectrum, and there's pure devotional, and then like when the iPhone 11 is coming out is purely here, right? It's purely day-to-day interaction. But then there's a spectrum. A zakat definitely has an ibadah aspect, but also has a lot of material benefits that are perceived by the mind. Okay. Question? So much of Hajj is purely devotional. Okay, it has a lot of benefits, but let me say wisdoms, right? Allah Azza wa Jal, certainly whatever He legislates is full of wisdom, and sometimes Allah Azza wa Jal gives us part of this wisdom. Okay, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That salah prevents sin and wrongdoing. But we don't stop. Somebody tells you, well, I'm just a rotten person, so I'm not going to pray, right? We don't stop praying because of the lack of those wisdoms. You see what I'm saying? And those wisdoms, when we seek to extract them, we differentiate between the wisdoms that Allah Azza wa Jal has mentioned and the ones where it's a best effort to understand part of that wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Al-Hajj in particular, right? What's a great example of the devotional aspect of Al-Hajj from Umar ibn Khattab? It's a great example.
The sacrifice.
The sacrifice has a social benefit, yes, but I'm thinking another narration.
Kissing the stone, the black stone.
Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, he was circling the Kaaba and he kissed the black stone and he said, what?
I would not do it if I had not seen properly.
Right? And so he kissed it because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam kissed it. He knows, he stated that he knows that this is a stone it neither benefits nor harms. Okay? But he kissed it because the example of the Prophet ﷺ in this devotion, okay, in this worship. And so in matters of pure ibadah, the basis is that we worship without excessive prodding into the whys and hows and objectives. Whereas in everyday matters or transactions, the basis is to ask why and what's the benefit and what's the harm, etc., etc. Dealing with these issues of pure ibadah differently from our everyday transactions. Today you get a first in this class. You get to look at boards with invisible ink. Let me take a couple questions first. Yes, Akif.
So I mean, there are things that are devotional like Salah, where there's, like, over time scholars have done some things to make things easier for people. Like for the example of having multiple shifts for Jummah is a thing that's purely devotional, but because not everyone can make it a certain time, or because the masjid's capacity cannot handle it, there are, I mean, to say, are we trying to say that all devotional things there isn't an element of, for the scholars, the learned people, to make adjustments or concessions in terms of having more availability but still be in the window? There are things like that, and like during Hajj, for example, there's a recommended time for stoning, in theory back in the day when there was not as many Muslims, but when there's millions of people there and they all go, now the scholars say, that can be stretched a little bit so that people aren't dying. So there are, even though it's a purely devotional act, there are elements of, for the safety of people and for those are extreme circumstances, but it's a benefit to do some.
Great question. I want us to differentiate between the why and the material benefit versus the scholarly effort to facilitate people within the boundaries allowed with Allah. So Salatul Jum'ah needs to happen. It doesn't grow old-fashioned. It's not just for people that have a weak connection for Allah. I've graduated. I don't need congregational prayers. I'm individually awesome in my salah. This kind of stuff. No, Salatul Jum'ah. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا. O you who believe, when the prayer is called on the Day of Judgment, rush to pray. Now, our ulama are responsible for, within the bounds of usul al-fiqh, within these rules, to understand what concessions can be made, what are, I don't want to call them concessions, what's the appropriate things that can be relaxed or changed in terms of the context. But notice that in that process, they're not canceling Salatul Jum'ah. They're not canceling Al-Hajj, right? Whereas, I don't see anybody saying, oh no, long live Nokia. That's what our pious predecessors used in the early 90s. It's haram to have an iPhone or Android or whatever. You see what I'm saying? It's totally different. There again, this impacts innovation, right? So in everyday matters, innovate away. New ideas, new economic constructs and so on, guided by Islam. In worship matters, No, you worship as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded to be worshipped.
Are we gonna get into like the mixed stuff, like for example dress?
Yeah, I'll give an example in a little bit. But I wanna illustrate something here. You guys get to see an invisible ink board today, inshallah. So a lot of people today illustrate the paths to God like the spokes on a bicycle wheel. Okay, imagine in this illustration, here's Jannah. Here's the contentment of God. Here's where you want to get to go, and here's us. Okay? Then the paths to God are many. I can meditate, I can worship, I can do this, I can do that. I worship God on my terms, right? And it's okay that there's different types of worship for everybody. And what's the Islamic analog to the spokes of the bicycle? What's the Islamic analog to the spokes on the bicycle wheel? As-sirat al-mustaqim. That there is one path in its core that is shared through the entire legacy of prophethood. Okay? Now the specifics around that, sure, the specific form of siyam varies, specific form of salah varies. Some of us, we have different expressions of our faith, but there's a core that binds us, that we're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way that Allah commanded to be worshipped. It is one of the ironies of our times that so much else in life that people value, you must submit in order to get the thing of value. You want to be a degree in whatever, you got to go to campus, you got to spend all this money that could get you a lot of cool toys instead. Then you came to study sociology, but you have to take all these random courses that you're not interested in for general university requirements, and if you don't, goodbye. No degree for you, right? Same thing for work. You want to work here? There's going to be a drug test, and a background check, and a this, and a that. You don't like it? Don't work here, right? So in so many things in life, we are, giving into a system or a rule. But ironically, in our times, it has become common that religion itself is on people's terms, right? And I want you to differentiate between a clear presentation of Islamic theology versus a pluralistic society. I'm not saying we impose these things on other people. I'm not saying we impose these values on other people, and we live in peace and harmony and respect with people that have different beliefs. Trying to understand what's the Quranic message. The Quranic message here is as-sirat al-mustaqim, that ultimately God should be worshipped on His terms, not on yours, right? In our own homes, I don't want somebody that wants to visit to knock on the bedroom window without warning at 2 a.m., open and let themselves in, right? I want to call, I want to coordinate, and I want you to come through the door that we identify. And yet, for so many of us in our prayers, so many of us in our worship, we come when we please, as we please, in the manner we please, right? This is rationally inconsistent. Allah Azza wa Jalla is supposed to be, is more important, is greater than our everyday endeavors. Religion is more dear, is more central, is more comprehensive in our lives than our jobs and our degrees. Why is it that when we come to this, that we do whatever we want, and in all these lesser matters, that we submit to these systems? The Quran talks about this a lot. Next time you read the Quran, consider reading it just looking for this. Because you know who had this problem? Quraysh. Quraysh had no problem with the ritual worship of Allah. Yeah, we'll do our thing, we'll do your salah, we'll do whatever. Just don't deal with my business, don't deal with my life. Okay? Allah Azza wa Jalla said, Ala lahul khalq wal amr. No, to Him belongs the creation and the command. Meaning that Quraysh recognized, yeah, these idols didn't create the heavens and the earth. Allah did. But when it comes to our economic transactions and the way we treat women and the way we don't talk to me about that. God is like for the temple, right? Or for this hypothetical. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenged this. Okay? Allah Azza wa Jalla challenges this extensively in the Quran. In fact, Quraysh comes to the Prophet ﷺ with a negotiating posture that we will worship Allah 1 year and we'll worship our idols 1 year. Right? So they were ready to concede on ritual worship. We'll do the whole salah thing and so on from a pure ritual standpoint. But they did not want to submit their lives to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Right? There had to be that. Some of them, obviously, some of the Qurayshis, gave up, made incredible sacrifices, right? And some of the companions, through this they became among the best of humanity. But so many people struggled with this, and it's ironic that in our times there's a very parallel struggle with this as well, right? What's the role of religion? And the Quran makes a compelling case for this. So on matters of pure devotion, the basis is that we submit without excessive prodding into the whys or the maqasid. On matters of everyday issues, the basis is to prod into whys and hows and to innovate and so on. On matters of worship, the basis is to worship as comes an authentic transmission, right? Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. The Prophet ﷺ says, pray as you have seen me pray. And Hajj, he says, khudhu anni manasikakum, that take your rites, your rituals from me. But in everyday matters, you innovate away within the moral boundaries of Islam, right? There we bring the creativity, the ideas, and so on. And in this, there is that core of submission. So there's some ayat from the Holy Quran that I want to share with you. In Surah number 22, verse number 32. Okay. Surah number 22, Surah Al-Hajj. Surah Al-Hajj, Surah number 22, verse number 32. Surah Al-Hajj is talking about devotion in general. It's named after Hajj in specific, has a lot of ayat that deal with Al-Hajj. And Allah Azza wa Jalla says, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. This, and whomever honors the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the symbols of Allah, indeed it is from the piety of the hearts. Okay? There's a statement for a past scholar, I want you to take it at face value with no disrespect, and I'm not sure that it's entirely accurate, but there's a point here. He says that when you look at Hajj, just the material aspect, right? Al-Hajj, for someone that doesn't understand these inner dimensions, can be reduced to walking around rocks, kissing a rock, walking between a rock and a rock, and then going and throwing rocks at rocks, right? A person could reduce it that doesn't understand any of these dimensions. Of course, we should never disrespect Al-Hajj, but I remember I actually experienced this myself with a colleague, and he was over at my house back when I was living in Maryland, and we were doing some whatever math and this stuff, and he had a very good understanding of Islam. He wanted to be mocking and demeaning, right? So it came time for Salah. We knew each other very well, so he knew I was going to get up for Salah, and I got up and I faced the Qibla, and I prayed, and he was doing his thing. I came back, and he was a little bit insolent. He said, "Are you done praying to the fireplace?" Right? Because the Qibla was in the direction of the fireplace. Now again, this wasn't based on ignorance, because I knew the person, so I smiled and moved on with life. I said, you know very well that I don't pray to the fireplace. But you see, when you strip it of that meaning, materially, that's not what we're praying. We're not praying because of the material experience. It's only when you see that we understand just part of the divine wisdom. Now, look at Al-Hajj. People are equal, right? We were always equal. We always had no more worth in front of, because you have more degrees to your name or more money. But this is a reminder, right? And then the Day of Judgment, I thought Disney was an approximation of the Day of Judgment until you experience Hajj, right? It's totally different. And it's different in so many ways, right? You think the biggest crowd is a line or a mall here in the West, but then you don't recognize this is an extremely select socioeconomic class that's in the mall or in an amusement park. The world really looks like Hajj. People in buses that don't look like they'll make it to the bottom of the driveway, coming from Africa, right, and coming from Asia. Till this day, there are a couple Hujjaj that make the journey on foot across countries, right? There was a gentleman last year who made the journey, for months and just missed Al-Hajj. And so the authorities actually put him up in Saudi Arabia to witness the next Hajj. He came on foot, right? And so you feel also, the closest thing in dunya that we'll experience to the Hashr of the Day of Judgment, right? You experience that devotion. Like, if you can go around the Kaaba 7 times, making dhikr and dua and Quran, not 8, not 6, not in January, not when it's cool, at this time, because Allah commanded it, He knows. Then you come back home and you don't do things that make perfect sense. Like then we don't, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us don't, drink alcohol, we have a rational basis why that happens. We have more access, okay? Don't engage in premarital or extramarital intimacy. We have a rational basis why that creates problems. And so Hajj can also be considered like a boot camp, a training, right? And then if you can be patient in Hajj or Umrah, you can be patient anywhere, right? But when we're in this element, it's like, it's July, and I haven't been in a water fountain in 20 minutes, don't come anywhere near me, right? I'm volatile, okay? Because that becomes our standard. But then you're put in this more challenging situation. So all of these are what? These are some wisdoms that come from Hajj, okay? And again, is it the full wisdom? Of course not. Allah Azza wa Jalla knows the full wisdom, right? And if you don't experience one of those wisdoms, is that a problem? It's not a problem. These are just human effort. The idea is at the end, we're devotional in this aspect. We worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this. So ذَلِكَ وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. That this is from the piety of the hearts. And I want to share with you an ayah that I think many of you may have never thought of this way. It's in Surah Al-Muddathir, which is Surah number 74. On, verse 31 is what I'm looking for, but it's in a context of a few verses before. And the summary is that, among other topics, these ayat indicate that let me get a translation. Can I borrow a translation? So the passage kind of starts from ayah number 26, and it's talking about a scene from the Day of Judgment, specifically hellfire. Okay. The broader passage starts from 21. I'm taking a very limited evidence from here, looking at ayah number 30, which indicates there are 19 angels in charge of this particular station. That's what I want to focus on. There are 19 angels in charge of this particular station. Okay? Now let's be clear, does Allah need these angels? No. Does Allah Azza wa Jall's commandment need to be carried out through these angels? No. Okay? Does Allah Azza wa Jal, hasha lillah, lack knowledge of what these angels will do and not do it? He knows better than them. So this is all part of our iman. So what's the next ayah say? That we have appointed only angels to guard hellfire, and we have made their number a test for the disbelievers, so that those who have been given the scripture will be certain, and those who believe will have their faith increased. And neither those who have been given the scripture nor the believers will have any doubts, but the sick at heart and the disbelievers will say, what could God mean by this description? In this way God leaves whoever He will to stray, and guides whoever He will. No one knows your Lord's forces except for Him. It is only a reminder to the mortals. Okay? So this ayah, it's a long ayah about a really particular, seemingly very detailed point. How many angels are at this incident, at this station of the unseen? Okay? And there's a footnote here that says some mufassirun have talked about this as a special significance of 19, and others have just talked about it as generally this iddah, this number or this count. But the idea being that next week we'll talk about the rational and belief tools in seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And that's knowing that Allah is Allah, what He's described by, what He's not described by. And then when you accept and you submit, there is a class of things that you do because they came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a class of things that you don't have the rational tools to independently verify, yeah, I think there should be 5 prayers, not 4. Yeah, I think tawaf should be 7, not 8. No, these are tests from Allah to test that piety. And remember again, a person doesn't believe in Allah, then why are you arguing about the number of angels? If a person does believe in Allah, then what does it make sense about him appointing the number of angels he will to do whatever he wills, how he will? Because that's who we believe in the first place, you understand? So, questions here, and we're going to have a series of case studies in a moment. Any questions at this juncture?
Going to your point, and what I'm struggling with is, and using your example, the reason I do my timesheet at RTI is because if I don't do it, someone will probably call me and say, you haven't done your timesheet. A, I'm going to report you to your supervisor, and B, we may even take your salary away from this month. And I know very clearly what the consequence of that is, right? And I know who will call me, and I know who my supervisor is. Whereas here in Islam, when it comes to submission, we are required to submit at some level to the unseen. The consequences of which are, they're somewhere in our mind, but they're not 100% clear. So the question that I always struggle with is, do I first submit, or do I first understand what I'm submitting to?
When we look at the role of reason and revelation in Islam, okay? What comes from reason, what comes from revelation, and what demands both? Okay? When it comes to matters of the unseen, where are we deriving knowledge of these matters from? Reason or revelation?
Revelation.
Purely revelation, okay? We have no access to the unseen. We can't independently verify it. Okay, another invisible ink drawing, right? Take you back to elementary school. You have a Venn diagram, all right? And here's reason, here's revelation, and here's reason. What's over here on the revelation part, okay? Issues of the unseen. The how of doing the pure devotional matters. Salat al-Dhuhr is 4 rak'at. Salat al-Maghrib is 3. Tawaf is 7 times, not 8, not 2. Wudu is more than the Prophet ﷺ did, is worse. Less than the Prophet ﷺ did is worse. All of this is coming from revelation, Quran, Sunnah. The mind is not going to independently verify. Now notice this. It doesn't mean that we don't use our minds. And specifically, these matters are not irrational. All right? For example, in Christianity, a lot of people struggle with the concept of the Trinity, right? That it seems irrational, it seems to challenge the foundations of the mind. And I'm not giving a class in Christianity, but when you look into that and so on, it's a big debate. There's nothing irrational about praying 4 rak'ats for Salat al-Dhuhr. There's nothing irrational about dropping the world and focusing in that moment and reconnecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It makes sense. But it's supra-rational, meaning that it is beyond the ceiling of what the mind brings by itself. There's no way to deduce through a mathematical proof, through the scientific method, through logic, how these issues came. They came to us through revelation. Okay. Then there are matters of reason, right? iPhone 11, Samsung, whatever, airplanes, all these things, and even some aspects of worship, right? Some of the social benefit of zakat, that's accessible by reason, right? Some of the secondary potential wisdoms and benefits of fasting and so on, they're not the reasons why we fast, but sure, as long as you contextualize it, all of this is using the mind. So what's in this central portion right here? What's demands both reason and revelation? This is your aha moment, by the way, inshallah. This is your aha moment. If you understand this, you understand how a lot of this fits together. What's in the shared domain? The thing, the aspect of our belief and faith that demands both revelation and the full presence of reason, mind, and body. Iman in. So for example, Iman in angels. Can I really do much with my reason there? I can't. The way that they were described is how they're described. I can't go up and shake their hands. I can't see them. I can't verify them. So I'm very much dependent on reason or revelation. Revelation. Okay? So, Iman in what? In Allah Azza wa Jal Himself is, and that's why that's the foundation of Iman. In our tradition, it is not a purely, it is something that invites and demands the presence of mind and intellect and body in addition with the revelation, right? And we're going to talk about this all of next class, but I want you to just think about how profound that is today, inshallah. That in fact, this process of seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Of understanding who Allah is and isn't. It's not something you can do purely with reason, right? Because ultimately the Quran describes who Allah is and isn't, right? What attributes are becoming of Allah, what attributes are unbecoming of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in this process, in the examination of the ayat, like we did last week, in the examination of the ayat in creation, there is a process and a presence of reason and the whole person seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, when that process goes on and you accept Allah Azza wa Jal's station and place, then you accept what Allah brought. Understand? And if you don't, then it is truly pointless to discuss. And Muslims, by the way, in da'wah sessions fall into this trap all the time. All the time. They talk about things as if they're talking to a Muslim audience. Well, because the Prophet ﷺ, in al-Isra and al-Mi'raj, this happened, and so on and so forth. But the problem is your audience hasn't accepted the Isra and Mi'raj. So either talk about it as part of our tradition, or if you're making a point, you have to start somewhere where they can share. Okay? And they can share. This is an invitation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that the Quran challenges with. أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ? Do they not traverse the path of the earth? And كيف بدأ الخلق? How did He begin creation? To see the end of those before them. To see وَفِي الْأَرْضِ آيَاتٌ لِلْمُوقِنِينَ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. That in the earth are signs for those of certain faith and in their own selves. So many challenges from the Quran. And I want you to notice also, and somebody's going to stop me from going on an hour tangent on this because this is next week's topic. But we'll just suffice with one ayah, inshallah, today. In Surah Fatir, Surah number 35. At the end of ayah 28, or the middle, is an ayah that we've often quoted in this class, and that is often quoted in general. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. That those that are truly reverent and conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from His servants are the knowledgeable and the scholars. But now somebody read a translation of the meaning from the beginning of ayah number 27. Go ahead.
That there are various colors among human beings, wild animals, and livestock too? It is those of His servants who have knowledge, who stand in true awe of God.
Sorry, one ayah back.
Sorry.
27.
Have you not seen how God sends water down from the sky, and that we produce with it fruits of varied colors, that are in the mountains layers of white and red of various hues and jet black?
Keep going.
That there are various colors among human beings, wild animals, and livestock too. It is those of His servants who have knowledge, who stand in true awe of God. God is almighty, most forgiving.
What did you notice about the ayah? this ayah is quoted out of its context all the time. That those that are most fearful of or in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the scholars. What did you notice now about the context of this ayah? Color? What else did you notice? The science and creation, okay, that science leads to faith. What else?
Just the reflection on creation and pointing out the beauty and the how amazing the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay.
This definition of knowledge of those who fear Allah.
Yes, very nice. Okay.
Appeal to reason.
This is very much appealing to reason, right? And it's revelation, and so I'm trying to illustrate. And inshallah, if you still have more questions or it's confusing, don't worry, because we're going to do this over several weeks, inshallah. And I know this is very new. Obviously, I'm sure you've noticed by now that this is not. A lot of us were never introduced to Iman in these terms, although I think it's very much the Quranic approach to Iman, and that was my hope for this first session, inshallah. So with that, let's go ahead and do a couple case studies. And we're going to talk about practical issues. We're going to continue our discussion, inshallah, of practical issues of dealing with text and try to motivate some of this issue between devotional and everyday matters, okay? So I think we get up, inshallah, or take your chairs, whatever works for you, and make groups of maybe 10-ish, plus or minus. So inshallah, go ahead and do that, and I'll start giving you a couple case studies. If smaller groups works for you, whatever works, just a group, inshallah, we'll be able to talk and debate this issue, because we're going to have several, inshallah. All right, these are a set of case studies that are all very realistic. For those of you that are, whether as individual, some of them are individual, some of them are communal, really a little bit of both. They're all anonymous. You won't recognize the individuals that are in these questions. They're all things that have happened in the interaction with MSAs or masajid or so on. And we'll go through these one by one and try to apply a little bit of what we learned today. Everybody ready? Number one, you're planning to go to graduate school or professional school or med school or whatever, which may require taking a student loan. And your family and you are not independently wealthy, like you don't have millions of dollars to just pay the entire thing in cash, and so the amount is more than the liquid money that you have at your disposal right now. And you're very confused and are wondering what to do, okay? So how would you approach this issue in terms of dealing with the text, not in terms of the fiqhi conclusion? How would you deal with this issue in terms of dealing with the text? What would you go do? For it. Couple minutes. I'm throwing you into an ocean on purpose, right? And so, you want to take a student loan, but I want to go to med school, but I heard interest is haram, and my buddy told me if I do it, I'll go to hellfire. Like, what do I do with this whole thing? Like, this is a very realistic situation that was just thrown at you without the tools you need. I want you to find the tools you need for how you would deal with this situation. That's why you're in a big group, so you can complete one another, inshallah. All right, student loans. What do you think? What did you say? Huh? Yeah, this is, we got like 10 case studies to go through. We don't mess around. What do you think? Student loans. How do you approach it? I'm focusing on the approach to the question, not the conclusion. Well, don't give me any wacky conclusions either, but I mean, what did you think? Okay, ask the imam, other approach.
Where you throw it up on that spectrum of devotional and transactional.
Okay, where did you put it?
Where I think it depends on the person. And it depends on their intention and why they're going into that profession.
Okay, fair enough. Other thoughts? Can you say it again in class? They didn't hear.
I said where an individual like tries to understand his intention, and then where he places that intention on that spectrum of how devotional is this objective or is it how transactional, and then that should determine how you approach your answer.
Other thoughts? What do you think?
We started off by saying that, the first step would be to investigate to see if there were any groups that offered, some kind of financing that is not interest-based.
Good. So she mentioned a good alternative, right? And a lot of the fatwa that allow conditionally for certain things that are prohibited by basis in Islam do so conditionally in the absence of reasonable alternatives and so on. You should keep in mind that goes to the mortgage fatwa from 1999 for the European Council for Fatwa and Research. The MJ fatwa on home buying also has conditions to it. And the student loan fatwa from MJ also has conditions to it. One of those being the lack of a viable alternative such as privately financed without interest or whatever.
I'm just thinking a lot of what you said about the fatwas within. So something is in the Quran is stated to be unlawful and it's pretty apparent that it is. Do you think that there's still concession that can be given to even proceed in an unlawful manner?
Good example is eating, a good and simple example is eating pork. Eating pork, halal or haram? Haram. Anybody If you're in the desert and there's no food and no water and you're in danger of dying from starvation, which is, it's not made up, may Allah protect us, but it happens, right? These situations happen. And there's nothing but a dead animal, which is also prohibited, or pork. What happens? It becomes obligatory for you to eat that animal for survival because the preservation of life takes priority over this prohibition. Now, I'm not telling you that so you can pseudo-fatigue yourself, right? Like, there are a lot of conditions, but also so that you don't feel like this is just pulled out of thin air. Actually, the ulama have categories of the conditions of necessity. A darura, which is an urgent necessity, or a haja, which is like a nice need, and then tahsiniyat, like that. And there's all this stuff that is part of what field of science? Maqasid, I'm thinking of umbrella over that. Usul al-fiqh. This is a big part of the study of usul al-fiqh. And so don't apply it. None of us should apply this as a layperson, but we should also understand enough to understand the ulama aren't pulling it out. Responsible ulama are not pulling it out of their heads. But that's generally how something like this happens. In order to give a proper introduction on how that's really done, take the rest of this whole course and then takes training. A lot of I remember a story for an American imam who was, trained for a number of years, maybe a decade, and then started to train under an actual like mufti at the Dar al-Ifta, that's a major majority Muslim country. And so one of his first issues after a decade of pure postgraduate Islamic study was a woman, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her, that had gone through a very difficult circumstance where there was a potential of rape or other issues and so on. Very complex situation. But she was so shy and so overcome with emotion that the way she presented the question didn't have this nuance to it, right? So a person would have to know that I have to ask additional things, right? And so she asked the question, the student in training Questions on this one? From a fiqh perspective, by the way, student loans, the basis ruling in Islam, this is the Cliff Notes version, is that they're interest-bearing transactions and haram. However, Muslims as a community have a need for education for a number of strategic benefits, and so there's a recent fatwa by the American Muslim Jurists Association, AMJA, that talks about conditions under which a student loan is acceptable for graduate studies, and it's a big help because for a long time, many of the councils hadn't really spoken about this in contemporary times. amjaonline.org, amjaonline.org. There's a lot of very practical considerations, such as the types of federal loans here, the interest-deferred loans that accrue interest after graduation for undergraduate eligibility. That has some of that. It's a common question we get in our imam's office, and we try to help people practically to find solutions. But I'm looking more for the approach here. The approach here is, this is a big deal. Riba, as Strafef mentioned, is explicitly prohibited in the Quran. I shouldn't take this lightly. I shouldn't just Google fatwa this and hop in and hope for the best. I should either follow a major council or ask a local person of trustworthiness to help me navigate this so that I know that I'm on solid footing. That person has a responsibility not to do hocus pocus Islam. But for you, what's your responsibility? To ask a competent and trustworthy person. If that person messes up, it's not your responsibility. You've discharged your responsibility, right? Just in the same way, may Allah protect us, that we would need advice from a doctor or something like that. Go ahead. So in our times, it's commonly called fatwa shopping, right? But it kind of depends on how you define fatwa shopping. Imam al-Shafi'i has a statement that whomever seeks concessions everywhere, then he will become a deviant, right? For example, when it comes to marriage law in Islam, one of the madhahib allow for a woman to get married without a wedding. Another one allows for without the witnesses, and another one allows without the without the law. So somebody says, "Oh, I got no wedding, no witnesses, and no law. It's not marriage anymore." You see what I'm saying? Each of these madhahib have an opinion, but nobody has these three opinions together. For example, or a person just Googles and finds anything, anybody with a hat or anything that says islamsomething.com and says, "I'm done," right? This is to be criticized, right? And we should be cautious about being overly lax. At the same time, generally facilitating matters is not a problem at all. If there is a legitimate difference of opinion, for example, there's a legitimate difference of opinion around combining the prayers in travel, right? So the Hanafi method does not allow combining prayers except for in Hajj. It doesn't allow that when you travel, you combine Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha. But the Jumhur, the majority opinion, does. And so, if I follow that majority opinion, it's not necessarily, it's not blameworthy. In that many ulama have said this, it allows me to observe my prayers, etc., etc. So facilitation is okay, but specifically seeking out holes or loopholes and so on is blameworthy. And nobody will ever be able to help you with this but yourself. Put in your mind that some things need fatwa, some things need taqwa. Okay? If you don't have taqwa, the fatwa of the universe can't help you. At the end, a person needs to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is like so many issues in Islam about this. Imam Suyuti says, if you see a person doing something that you believe is haram, but you know there's a difference of opinion concerning it, then you should not beat up on them or argue with them or stop them, right? And a very practical situation, a person might independently not follow the whole line fatwa. They're rent for life, they want to stay away from the riba. Somebody else adopts this council opinion and buys with all these conditions. We should not call that person a deviant, a weak Muslim, want to be individually strict with yourself, that's great. Hold yourself to a higher standard. As a community, we should not beat up on each other. I mean, I don't know how to say it nicely. Like, if the ulama differ, get over it. Pick an opinion and let others pick an opinion. Because Allah Azza wa Jal will that, major credible ulama differ on these issues. Okay? And so as long as we're in that perimeter of difference, inshallah, success. Next question. I just read the following hadith. A person comes to you saying, I just read the following hadith. Uthman ibn Abu al-As reported that he came to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam who said, I'm sorry, let me start from the beginning. A person comes to you saying, I just read the following hadith. Quote, Uthman ibn Abu al-As reported that he came to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, Allah's
Just don't do it.
Just don't do it, okay? In other words, just continue with the salah. It's not, you're correct in that it's not obligatory to do this, okay? So if a person has a level of problem with this, that is, they can let it go, right? In the sense that they recognize it as a part of the sunnah, but they don't individually do it. It's
So
reasonable
part of
approach.
it is, I mean, that I think is that it's a personal way to refocus your prayer, and if it is a recommended way to do it, Prophet recommends. It's not necessarily that it's 3 times versus 5 times or 7 times. It's just you can extrapolate some reason that it's something physical you do to refocus your mind, and that's what you're really thinking about doing, but you're manifesting in this physical form that Prophet recommended. But while you're doing that, you're saying to yourself, your salah isn't focused right now. Let's refocus here. Let's re-energize ourselves. That's what you should be thinking about while doing the act. The process is the recommended way to do it. It's not necessarily you don't focus on the number and the actual act. It's more the intention of refocusing, and that's the more important thing here.
Okay?
So where does it fit in that when you go on Hajj, the stone and all this stuff? So, I mean, just, comparing him wide open, his style is bad, he don't do anything, and Sam, so what, how does it fit in together? When you go for Hajj, and you store that on the spot.
So I want you to know that these two, we have to really focus for these answers, because they're both illustrating how slippery the slope can get very fast, right? In terms of if we're in emergency mode, helping a person not have major faith crises, like, yes, on any sunnah matter, we can say it's part of the sunnah, but I just personally not able to do it. But that's a
brother made another example. He says, why don't we just jump up and down to get the shaitan out while we are praying, right? As opposed to spitting. And the point is, you need to find a way to get your focus back in prayer, but not to the point of completely going outside the realm of what you're supposed to be doing during the prayer, which is standing on the prayer mat, facing the Kaaba, and doing your prayer. So if you start jumping up or down or taking a shower just to get the shaitan out, you've gone too far outside the realm of what you should be doing in any case.
The difference between the two is that the Hajj story is hadith mutawatir. It has been said and resaid by a group of people, and that hadith of when Abu al-As, I'm not saying that is, I don't know if this is a sahih hadith, inshallah it's a sahih hadith, but that's a big difference in weight between something that is mutawatir and a hadith that was one time and said. I'm not saying that this is also. So I'm going to pass on really quickly. It's my understanding that are we trying to kind of extract how are we going to address this person? How are we going to address the hadith? Because I think if it's the root of this situation is this person's coming to you for a question, then it's not really necessarily what the question is. It's more about where the premise of the question is coming from, right? So if it's back to kind of that 19 Angels example you gave, it's like if you believe, you believe. If you don't, you don't. So either way, your intention behind the question is what we have to get at. So I think trying to engage in dissecting the hadith would actually be more harmful than addressing the question. So it kind of comes to like that whole reason versus revelation thing and just like the rationale behind the questions. I think that's why it is a slippery slope, because then someone will say Jamal, someone will say, why are we going around to that? So it becomes more of a whole bunch of like, why do we do this? So we might have to try to say, we do it because if we believe it's the sunnah, this is how we address it. If we don't, then that's a whole other situation.
So I want everybody to notice and try to combine these thoughts together. Where does this act fall in the spectrum of categorization that came up? It's pure devotion. It's part of the soul, right? Pure devotion. Therefore, if you employ any rational explanation, be very careful not to fall down the slippery slope. I don't want to tell you, no, you tell them, believe, be quiet, don't ask. I'm not saying that. But understand that whenever you employ a rational explanation for a devotional matter, it might not land with that person in front of you because it's not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. It's your explanation of your understanding, right? So I'm laying something that's not the shaitan's advocate right here. And I'm saying like, depending on that person's level of journey, right, and of their iman journey, it just doesn't click. Well, I mean, if I spit, I can wrestle the shaitan to the ground and then get back to salah. I'm being a little ridiculous. But some people it's not going to click because it's not an A from the Quran. I think it's your explanation. In those situations in devotional matters, you need to understand not to pursue it too far. Ultimately, to know that this issue, Allah Azza wa Jalla did not give us a full rational explanation of why it's like this. Surely there's wisdom. Surely the Prophet ﷺ does not speak based on whims. But we have not been given the why of the minutiae of religion. This is one of the minutiae, of religion. It's a small point. Okay? The more mature point is to not dismiss it. Well, this is not, as mashallah, the whole class acknowledges this part of our sunnah. But we know maybe it's not the most emphasized part of the sunnah. It's not a sunnah mu'akkada, say, for example, right? So we know where it falls. The most mature approach is to embrace the entire sunnah and be deferring to it. But we know if a person's really struggling, not everything needs to be jammed down the throat at one point. I know where this falls in the priority step. You know, honestly, it's very important that we not criticize people for having questions. Okay? And you want to know how to deal with questions? Deal with children, right? They tell you, why is the alif straight but the bet is curved? Right? Do you really need to beat up on this kid? Don't ask and so on. How are you gonna answer?
I don't know.
Right? You don't know, right? But at the end, the answer to this comes with maturity, right? It comes with time. Like this is the way the letters were written. There's no like super rational, oh wow, right? And then there are matters like, I don't know, kids ask these really interesting questions, right?
not a bad thought, but it's not why we do it. If somebody disagrees with it, they don't stop doing it. That's not why it's in the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet, did not give us the why of all the minutiae. This is to be differentiated when a 15-year-old comes and tells you, so tough, almost everybody else in school has a boyfriend and girlfriend, right? This is a very realistic problem. A lot of young people today feel like Islam is a burden, it's a hindrance to their success. You have a lot of rational access to that question. You can help that young person understand how what seems like a burden today is rationally so much easier in the long run. Saves you from teenage pregnancy and from this, and by the way, these statistics. And you know what? In this society where people don't only get married, before they're together, it's shown that people that live together for years and then get married, their marriages don't end up more stable and so on. And we know that Allah Azza wa Jalla has more wisdom than this that we know, but we have access. You have to differentiate on that spectrum. That's what I'm trying to drive, and that's why I'm kind of particularly picking the detail.
So how would you respond then to somebody like, could you throw a question back at them, like saying like, do you have a problem with spitting 3 times suicide? Like, why are you trying to get rid of that? Like, how would you actually respond? Because like, these are the kind of questions that like, amongst friends that, this is just like, it comes up so like, randomly, like, yeah, why don't you spit 3 times, So like, well, how do you like, we're not going to say like, oh, well, let's go to a scholar or let's go to the local imam and ask, but like, so simple things, like, the random questions that come up like amongst the friend circle, like, how would we?
So, as was mentioned in the earlier comment, the way I presented this case study intertwined that interpretation of the hadith with the context of this person, right? And that's purposeful, so that you can notice that they're 2 separate things, right? So it would be wise to understand this person's background. Where are they in their faith journey? How is their general understanding? To me, the key thing to immediately pick up on this hadith is that this is the devotional matter, the basis of devotional matters we have to ask why. You don't need to say it. When that clicks in your mind, several things happen. Number 1, my local imam or scholar does not have more access to knowledge of the why here, except by his or her more extensive understanding of revelation, right? In other words, if Allah said things that I don't know about that explain the why here, then they might know more. But as human beings, they can't rationalize more. Why did Jannah have this and not that, and so on? They may have more extensive knowledge, they may have more experience, but as individuals, that can seem is not accessible to human beings, right? Whereas if it's boyfriend, girlfriend, if it's alcohol, oh, I know this person works with you, I'm going to go talk to them, I'm going to look at this study, and I'm going to start this discussion circle. It's totally different, right? So to me, the key realization is to categorize this as a devotional matter. You understand where you're going, and then as you explore with this person, if they're early on, you talk about something that's appropriate to them. If they're really struggling with the interpretation of the hadith. I had this experience once. I just thought of this as you mentioned it. I met a very nice brother while I was in Boston. And this brother, we met one day in a halaqah and stayed like 2 hours after, just talking in the middle of the night about this issue. This brother was a devout Muslim. He was highly educated, really sharp brother. He ended up joining the team that helped us, alhamdulillah, make the class Shattering Doubts. Okay? This brother was a devout Muslim in all respects, except in his very advanced biology study, he had serious problems with evolution, right? He could not reconcile evolution with Islam. He's salah on time, tarawih on time, but the questions he asked about evolution
exactly.
I'm not trying to avoid.
So I'll let you on the spectrum. It's not worship. It's not worship. This is more about dealing every day within the morals of Islam, and there's a lot of room for rationality. This is probably immoral Islamic way to do something like that, or irrational too.
It's not their money,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
they can't decide what to do with it.
Yeah, because your members gave that money.
Yes, it's not he hire a lawyer first?
Let's say it was tortilla, what would you be passing?
But that's applies anyways, regardless of who the person is or what their morals are. Yeah, exactly. Why do you why do you just have a trust issue?
There is this
Exactly.
might not want to be part of the organization, get money for himself. And it's like, there's no Quranic or like hadith about this stuff ever happening. It's giving to someone for safety, and that has happened before, that if you're going to seek out, you can give your money to someone for safety.
So let's go again. This is money that was given to an organization as a public trust for a specific purpose. We have now taken that money, put it in someone's bank account, presumably that's but that's immediately relevant. Right? I have to stop where the money has transferred because for other reasons. We have already now violated several I don't care how good that person is. I really don't. It's totally irrelevant.
This usually means a little bit of common sense and reason. This is the opposite end of the spectrum, something that's not emotional. It usually means reason.
Alright, what do you guys think?
Moral values of
Who said that in this basis this matter is acceptable? Raise your hand. Who said this is prohibited? Who didn't raise their hand? What do you think?
Well, I didn't get to say this in the group, but I was just thinking about if it's a university, then the university probably has rules that you can't put a student organization's funding in a personal account. So if you're breaking the rules of the university, that would also be problematic.
Again, on that spectrum, it's more of the daily activity, but not, active worship. That being said, there's a lot of moral considerations you should take and some rationality. And, I think in the end, we all thought it was a very good to do, and it's not recommended to do it that way.
I just think it's
terms of the Quran and Sunnah explicitly guiding us what to do in this situation, in this explicit situation, what will we find? Not in terms of the rules and so on, in terms of explicit yes or no for this situation. Okay, so there's definitely guidance in the Quran about contracts, about amana, about collective organization, and that's what we're going to do. So I want to differentiate between that there's not going to be outside of the Quran, ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, don't put this money in a trust. It's not going to be this situation, but there's going to be guidance in the Quran with regards to contract, with regards to amana, and so on. To give you an idea how real this situation is, as a relatively junior, younger imam, I've seen this already like a half dozen times in these communities. And there's one community where a person took it upon themselves to go on a, forgive me for the word, crusade to save the community. Took one of the most highly functional communities with really good youth issues and intimidated the treasurer into transferring all the assets to their name. Now, some 8 years later, that community is still in the dumps and still suffering from this one dumb decision. Another community, Board of Trustees, lost their mind, got into a very, very tense discussion, and transferred all of the community's money in the amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars to a trust account in those 7 trustees' names, taking it outside the organization. From that one move alone, the entire community went to courts, spent upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 on nonsense, and I would easily say that to this day the place is devoid of youth because of the bitter taste of that foolish moment that we'll all be accountable for. Another situation, a group of trustees tried to set up a trust account, did not do a very good job. This is a private trust, not a community trust, because they set up in the name of an individual, not as a true trust. That person's individual financial problems became, the money got seized in a bankruptcy place because they never set it up as a true trust and created a huge headache for me and a bunch of other people that were involved, and issues still not resolved. So I want to tell you, this is not fake. This is not for a classroom. Like, people that mess this up, mess up people's lives for a long time. So it's important to notice that while this is not specifically in the Quran and Sunnah, the guidance is. You should not ignore that. And I think with an examination of the guidance, with the assumption of the typical governance of an Islamic organization, this is absolutely prohibited. Because you're making an ijtihad that this will protect the money, but your ijtihad is not infallible. This is your estimation. The money is governed by a contract that's already done. You cannot change that contract because of you think evil is going to come. You have to work in other ways, right? So this is an example. Again, there's a lot of assumptions. I'm not saying there isn't a case where an individual is the sole trustee or whatever. In general, things would be absolutely prohibited Islamically, even though it's an everyday matter. So I'm trying to illustrate some of this nuance about how you practically deal with these situations. And this was the first case study with a more communal taste to it. So we'll go through, are these case studies helpful? They good? Useful? Because I know a lot of you are in situations where you take these things. A couple closing remarks. Something that we're looking at today is this spectrum on which there is the extreme of examining the Quran and Sunnah myself and formulating an opinion. Okay? This is a huge trend in the Muslim community today, right? People that are renewing calls that scholars are all, male chauvinists that are in a club. They can access the Quran, we can access the Quran to the degree that people say about the companions, they're people and we're people, right? I mean, this is very prominent, and I want you to develop the tools to deal with it responsibly. Some of the challenges here is that how much knowledge do you need to have to be able to do this? It's not about being a man or a woman. It's not about being American or not, right? It's about, do you understand? There are, one, like a mujtahid mutlaq is somebody that can truly do more reasoning, even independent of the centuries of tradition, or at least informed by it, but has the ability. So these people are like Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik. There are maybe, debatably, 1 to 5 of them alive today. Right? Maybe. Some people say there are none So who cares if they're men or women or from here or from there? The idea is their knowledge, right? And so this is very dangerous in that it can lead to just totally unreasonable things. And today, I mean, look how relatively simple these issues are, right? Like spitting 3 times in prayer or money. Like when we talk about gender roles, when we talk about dress, when we talk about whatever, this gets really dicey, and so I want you to get comfortable with this. On the other hand, is the blind following of one scholar, right? Which brings its own problems. We'll talk about that too, but it can lead to intolerance